You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we're going to do a deep dive into what our good friend Justin Ruiss here says. We were just having a conversation around community-based marketing. So Justin is on the BWG Strategy side, moderates a ton of sessions in the paid media space, has been on at our full day events, has moderated dinners and panels, just as a wealth of information. And he and I were catching up earlier, got into this conversation around, what's next around media as a whole. And this community-based marketing topic came up, and I said, hold the phone there. We need to just hit record on a podcast and kind of do a deep dive. So Justin, I'll kick it over to you if you want to do a brief background on yourself and all that fun stuff. And then we'll jump into, a cool conversation on marketing of the future.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks, Aaron. So Justin Ruiss, I am, like Aaron said, I'm the moderator lead for media and e-com on the BWG Strategy side, where we host industry sessions and forums with key executives from across the landscape and industries, trying to uncover trends and facts and ideas about what's going on within particular spaces. Like I said, covering e-commerce and media. Background before that was spending 5.5 years in primary research, with an additional 5.5 years prior to that in sell-side equity research. So doing a lot of research my entire life, but
love it.
Doing my best with BWG, that's for sure.
Yeah, awesome. So give me the quick rundown when we say community-based marketing, and then it's just a cool conversation from there on out. What do you mean by that?
So, it's funny, the dawn of like social and paid social, seen a lot of that channel really start to materialize and just really kind of full swing become what it has become at this point. And it's just a juggernaut, right? With Meta, with Snapchat, TikTok now, even, you could lump Pinterest, X, those types of players into the platform. But I think the thing that really kind of stood out to me over the course of conversations is now, with Reddit being a really strong player here, there's a little bit of conversation that's been going on in our forums as to like, is this a search product or is this a social product? And that's kind of why I've arrived at this like community-based moniker, because I think it's a little bit of both, where you have this social network of users who are mining the platform for information, high intent, high engaged users that are looking for answers to specific questions, very much in like a search fashion. But they aggregate in similar communities. Maybe you can call them subreddits in the case of Reddit, but folks like myself may be, fans of Marvel, or they may be fans of, particular IPs, or they love Bravo TV. They have certain core affinities that make them community members. And a lot of this ends up coming down to like community management, which is why that word continues to come up and up and up in a lot of these conversations, is to like, hey, what does your audience look like? Well, it really kind of looks like a community at this point. That's why I've kind of arrived at that. I'm not saying I'm coining anything here, but it's the best kind of name that I could come up with at this point to get a good sense of like where you blend a lot of these things together.
Is it also like almost so I just moderated and I don't know, you've chatted with Zach over at Blue Wheel Media. They're a great partner as well. We just did it around influencer marketing. And what's very interesting is we, in a way, got into this whole conversation around search. And then from that, it got into this conversation around how people are using platforms today and what the future of even search looks like from the standpoint of Google now, you have a lot of people, younger generation, just using TikTok in place of Google. They want a specific answer, and they don't want 1.2 billion like search results that they have to sift through. And with this, and something that Zach was bringing up was where Google is going right now in the AI generation, the AI, compilation and reporting out, or isn't necessarily what people want. And or if you can go to like a TikTok and they can match you with a person who's in, to your point, in your community group, somebody that's in the same, like bubble, I'll say, as you, and they're delivering them that other people have rated them as high profile or high intent content, and putting them in front of you to show you how to change a tire, make the best smoothie, apply a eyeliner, is completely different than Google.
Yeah, and the same likewise, right? For like Reddit, where it's like, I don't know which of these two things, what's the difference between a Sony and a Samsung TV? You'll get a thread miles long of people who are avid, you know, avidly into the specs, who can slice and dice how, like, what the performance between these two products look like. Same thing with TikTok, right? It will point you in the direction of like, what really should I be using for running? Here's the appropriate influencer showing off the appropriate footwear in the appropriate manner, best way possible. And where that purchasing journey leads is, completely different stories, right? Could it lead back to Amazon? Could it lead to a TikTok shop? Could it lead to, straight to the DTC site for many of these brands? It's hard to say because the journey is so vast at this point. But I think this concept is traveling through so many of these different platforms, whereas like Google, Meta, the titans in this arena, they're dabbling in it in areas where like Google's traditionally search. Can they bleed out into these other areas? Meta is traditionally social. Can they bleed out into more search? Maybe there's more of an opportunity. Look at TikTok doing TikTok search ads. Like there are these opportunities for them to diversify that media offering, but it's all I come back to it. It's all centered around like where your audience is. And I think that becomes this new concept of like, is the top of the funnel your community? Is that kind of how you should be thinking about how you approach the entirety of the conversation? Because so many marketers these days are just very bottom funnel focused. ROAS, ROI, what's my attribution? What does conversion look like? And all of these metrics really relate to like, hey, where are the clicks coming from? Where are the impressions coming from? How closely can I get to personalization, right? Like, how closely can I get to the customer to get them from seeing an ad to clicking on it to leaving with it in their shopping cart? Versus like the brand building aspect, where it's like, well, I have this brand new brand. It resonates, it's appealing, there's something to it, but who am I really targeting with this? There's a wider reach that you can have, but when you understand where it fits within your community, you could be way more effective. And I think that's where the journey for personalization starts, is at the community level.
Yeah, I think it is going to be driven by a couple of things. One is around the content and how you're creating and what the target is. That's a big part, because if you're going to be on all these different community, all these different social channels, how are you generating the content? Because a lot of times the traditional photo shoots type things don't resonate. So if you're a marketer, like step one now is almost not, I should say, step one goes hand in hand with step two. You can argue which one comes first, is where am I going to be doing this and what type of content do I need? And then that's going to drive how I'm going to go get that content. Because you can't just do photo shoots anymore. That's not a driver. The other thing that comes to mind is I think that Facebook has a Meta, whatever you want to call it, we're old school, but has a better advantage, as they're just better suited for what the future looks like than Google, because I agree with you that it is these community groups, and that's what Meta is built, and that's where they live, right? It's based around a community, not just a search engine that's delivering results rather than answers. So
Remember the old days where everyone would say, well, Google is going to be around forever because a search engine is this ubiquitous tool that everybody needs to have. And Facebook is where, like, the old joke was social media is like a high school party. Once the parents show up, the party's over. And like now Facebook is all the parents. It's the age for that is trending up, higher and higher and higher. But seems like Meta is unstoppable from an attribution perspective, from generating results, the performance, the lion's share of budgets going towards Meta versus any other social platform that's out there. So I think that the platform game ends up being like, well, what can we do to really kind of trump some of the incumbents, right? What can we do that's differentiated enough that the incumbents are going to have to either shed off some large percentage points in ad spend, or we look appealing from like a tertiary or an ancillary perspective, right? And fight it out in the like the welterweights or like the mid class weights instead of the heavyweights, right? So I think that's a lot of the conversation right now where people are starting to understand like, well, what platforms are going to be useful? What's going to be the next best way for us to either get attribution or generate conversion, or from a brand building perspective. I think to the point that you made about content, this is one of the other things that I think is super interesting and seeing it from a top-down landscape. One of the things or one of the areas that we cover is gaming, right? So video game publishers, player sentiment, things like that. Community management within the gaming space is very it's like vivid, right? Developers and publishers are in constant communication with players. Feedback is given, feedback is implemented at like lightning speeds. If you look at Larian Studios, the folks who made Baldur's Gate 3, they implemented a lot of the feedback from community management and their community over platforms like Discord and other community areas really quickly to make the game more robust. I think brands are going to start to latch onto that concept and understand that platforms like Reddit are the areas where they can generate the feedback, are the areas where they can launch the criticism, get it, and then implement it back into their product set or into their messaging or what have you. Because the closest that you can get at this point is having the conversation directly. Maybe that's through LinkedIn and in like a B2B sense or a B2B fashion. Maybe it's from a D2C perspective or B2C perspective with something like a Reddit. But communication to me is almost as important as content creation, because that is kind of a piece of content that you're trying to put out there, or a piece of creative, so to speak.
Yeah, so you just had me thinking. So when we think about that data collection as a whole, it is happening in places like Amazon, where you can do this review, collection, aggregation. You can then, basically get feedback on your products, your competitors' products. You can then create your detail pages around bullet points that, declare you're the best for whatever attribute. You can also take that feedback and give it back to your product development team. And rather than it being just anecdotal, hey, I heard, it's like, hey, there's 125 people that just said this closure was hard to open.
Yeah,
right. So that is something that's been out there, and a lot of brands, like the cutting edge brands, are using it right now, and some legacy large conglomerate brands are starting to tag into for new product development. But the other part that you're saying is like this feedback. You look at like a Sprinkler, a Hootsuite that were doing social media listening. Originally, that social media listening was purely to be around, hey, is somebody talking bad about the product? I mean, I was in the OTC pharma space. Hey, we had to know if somebody's like, hey, this stuff made me sick, because we had, reporting requirements to the FDA.
You may have had to looking at it, right? Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. We were looking at it from the standpoint of, hey, how can we catch a conversation and either watch it and let it play out depending on where it's at, or engage with it if we needed to. But I like what you're saying, which is can we convert that same thing to getting the real-time feedback and have a platform for doing it and aggregating it and having it be a direct feed? And then instead of just having like 10 or 20 or 100 like key community members who are giving the feedback, if you can give that to 2,000 and AI can grab it, segregate it into the right, pillars, and then tackle them one by one, ranked by priority. It's a whole different way of using these social media listening tools, but might even be more beneficial in the end.
Yeah, it's game changing. I think it's something that in a lot of the conversations, right? It's this idea of how can we be better aligned with the consumer's thoughts and opinions and build that into the loyalty while also creating an offering that is more personalized to what the customer wants. And everything to what you're saying, Aaron, is super on point, because it is this idea of like, what are we doing to get better aligned with so many of these different initiatives? Because it's like spinning way too many plates at this point for many brands to kind of really get it 1,000% right. But a lot of them are focused on this problem. They understand, or not problem, but this challenge. They do understand that there are boundaries to cross, and they want to get better at the listening aspect, the response aspect, the personalization aspect, utilizing their assets in the best way, whether it be creative, whether it be a conversation, and use those to go forward. I think this is kind of the year, or we're going to head into the year where brands are going to be more in a position to listen to customers, because I think that's the number one thing that's going to drive a lot of loyalty is like, well, I was heard, right? The brand heard me. They understood my thoughts and opinions on this, and reacted in a way that's favorable. Maybe it might be favorable only to specific community members or specific customers or specific cohorts. But to those cohorts, it's the difference between spending the extra dollars for, the premium side of what they want, or aligning with a brand that may be, maybe mid-tier, but provides a lot of the better feedback to the customer at that point. Because brand building is still super important. Still one of the most important things that we can do at this point, especially, like I said, with so many people focusing on performance marketing these days.
Yeah, it's interesting is you think about that performance side. There was this pendulum that swung around influencers where they were all on the scene, they're making tons of money, but then you couldn't actually measure the effect on the back end. You could say, hey, I saw sales go up, but was there a direct connection? And then there's a pendulum swing back to the affiliate side where, hey, I'll pay you for performance. I'll give you free product up front, and I'll give you 10 or 15 or 20% of the back end when people can convert. And now actually that pendulum is swinging back the other way, which is, people are just looking at profitability as a whole.
Yeah.
And the price of influencers have come down. And then, oh, by the way, I can grab all of that content and use it for something else as well. It's when you said, hey, there's a lot of plates spinning. I just think as more and more plates just keep getting added on, it's not like, right, originally it was influencers and that was one plate. And then everybody's like, we're going to swap that out for affiliates. And no, actually, you're not going to swap the plate out. You're just going to add an affiliates plate on, right? And then you're going to add a content plate on. And then you're going to add a social media listening tool. And then you're going to add a community manager. And then you're going to add a feedback, tool and a review aggregator tool. And then all of a sudden, fundamentally, the biggest change in the past like 7 to 10 years has been that role of the marketer and having adapt to the digital marketing landscape. And oh, by the way, you have to have an attribution tool that connects everything now. That's bonkers, dude. Like
it's a lot. And not to mention the diversification of channels.
Yeah.
Add in the fact that now retailers are getting into the mix with the retail media networks. Add in the fact that you have to shift your budget over from linear to CTV because that's where the data overlay is going to be stronger and the targeting is better. But hey, TV was always a reach and frequency thing, right? But now you have data, makes it quote unquote better. But
Yeah, I did one of these episodes. One of the podcasts I did was with Adam Epstein from. Well, he was a president over at Perpetua. They sold to Central and then rolled up underneath Flywheel. But he's built GG, which is a STV platform that plugs into the Amazon Marketing Cloud, also the DSP. And then if you look at where Amazon is focusing its, through its DSP, where to advertise now, I mean, it'll be on Netflix. It's on, it'll be a Hulu, Disney. It's basically going to be everywhere. And that's something that wasn't even thought about. Like where was it? It was at Amazon Unboxed just a couple years ago. So maybe like 15 months ago. I was talking with the team selling streaming TV ads for Thursday Night Football on Amazon. And they're at Amazon and they're like pulling their hair out. Like, this is impossible. We're getting junk football games. There's no attribution. And you think in 15 months, Amazon has completely flipped that on its head. And better scheduling, like they're becoming this powerhouse that starts to make these different demands. And oh, hey, by the way, they're becoming one of the largest ad tech drivers around. It's bonkers, dude. It's bonkers.
And not to mention the alignment to some of the highest quality inventory that you can get out there. They own MGM.
Yeah.
They continue to push really strong programming. And like you said, the distribution is there.
Yeah, so, and it's targeted.
Yeah.
It's targeted. That gets back to like even on the direct-to-consumer side, where you can put a pixel on your direct-to-consumer site, feed it into the Amazon Marketing Cloud, right? It's a clean room. You can then do an exact match on your ideal customer because they were just on your site, dedupe them out, and then target that an exact lookalike. And you can give them, any ad through DSP. You can retarget them, and you don't have to just drive them back to Amazon anymore. You can take them back to your direct-to-consumer site.
It's what, but mind, it's gone. It's forget exploded. It's imploded at this point. But like, that's why I think with so much of the complexity that's out there on these, and not to mention the expense at which so much of this requires, I do think there's going to be this sense of like, where can we do our best research on our customers? And community, you come back to that word all the time, that's the area that you're going to be able to do some of the best research, because yes, you can arrive at that lookalike customer in so many of those different instances, like you just said, having those digital capabilities of linking everything back and like this very, electric spider web that's going on, or you have this ideal cohort that is maybe aligned with what your brand is looking to accomplish, and you can mine from there. And I think it's coming at it from the bottom up, or it's coming at it from the top down. In either instance, I don't think it's going to yield. I don't think it's going to be a situation that doesn't yield good performance and results. I think it's going to be one of those situations where it's like, now we at least have two choices. And that's a good thing, right? Because you have two different approaches. If you can both arrive at the same, you have the luxury of being able to complete both. You have the instance of arriving at the same result, which really kind of drives home a lot of the, like, we made the right choice here. I think that's a good thing overall, but who knows? I mean, it's an interesting way of kind of looking at a lot of the situation.
Yeah, it's the other thing I was thinking about is when you think about this community aspect, and it helps you, I think, define who your actual ideal customer is, like what your actual target demographic as a whole. Because I've had a few instances with brands. One was, a women's jean brand, and we'll spare the name. And essentially their targeting was around, hey, we are the post-grad 23 to 30-year-old woman professional. And that was all they're targeting. And so when they did actually go with the deep dive around highest repeat shoppers, most interactions, right, through Facebook, through TikTok, when you can look at all of that, They took a step back, and it was 85% like 40 plus women. And all they did was shift their targeting, and they basically doubled sales overnight.
Yeah.
And that's what these groups, these community based, this is what it allows you to do. Again, if you'll listen, right?
Yeah.
If you don't try to like completely control the conversation, I believe you have to be part of it. Sometimes it's great just to let that conversation roll and see where it ends up. And all they did was then have to shift all of their targeting. Like double. It's like overnight. It's like they're just printing money now. It's awesome.
It's wild. Yeah, it's something that I hope more brands can latch on to, that, like you said, listening, right? If you can perform that, it's, don't interrupt your customer.
Yeah.
Like give them the means to complete what they need to do, and they'll show it back in loyalty. And that's a two-way street, right? So I think it all ends up working in the brands. I think the brands have more power than they realize at this point. I think heading into 25 with so much data being available and hopefully trending back towards them, I think they're in the position to really capture a lot of good data and really get to understand their customers in really unique and good ways. So much so that like the retailers and some of these bigger tech companies have collected so much great first party data on customers. I think some of that's set to come back, hopefully, towards the brands, next year and hopefully beyond, but we'll see.
Yeah, I had Megan Caroon on. She's over at Clarendata. They're probably the best at retail media measurement as a whole, like accurate across the full spectrum, paid search, social, attribution, in-store, halo effect. It's pretty impressive what they've built over there. But the main thing is empowering brands with that conversation as a whole. Just from the standpoint of when you can have honest conversation about what's happening in the performance, because you mentioned retail media networks, there's probably approaching 700 now. That's the reality, which is totally bonkers. Like
Set to get to thousands, like by like next year, I think it's something ridiculous.
And there's probably 20 that work, right? And there's like the top two that work better than anything. But hey, everybody wants a piece of the pie. It's coming in with the real data. And then, yeah, I totally agree with you. How do you leverage what you have and put it on the table to get more of that data out of the retailers? What a classic episode I did with Tim Armstrong over at Flowcode, where this was over a year. This might have been 15 months ago. He was just beating the drum. So he's former AOL, former Google, and now has this Flowcode, which is a first party data collection attribution like platform in the form of a QR code. It does tons more than QR code, but like his number one thing was everybody has your data. Everybody has you as a brand. Everybody's got your data and they're holding on to it. And you need to claw tooth and nail to get it out of them, because that is gold. It's the currency of the future, is kind of what he was saying, is the more you have, because if you look at it, like all of this new tech is driven by AI. And what's going to differentiate you from your competition is how much high quality data you have that you can plug in and train all these new AI tools on. And if you've got garbage data, it will give you garbage output.
Results.
If you have super high quality, clean data in the same format, feeding it in, and you train that AI tool, whatever it is, like generative AI for images or videos or whatever it is, or email or SMS or customer service, the more you can train all that, like with clean data, the better you're going to be. You're going to outpace all the competition. And so I loved your point on data and first party data and how much all these retailers and everybody else has of your customer. Actually, it's totally crazy. What are you most excited for? Like what?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
What am I most excited for next year? I think we've seen so many of the ad tech players make some pretty strong partnerships with the streaming platforms out there. Magnite with Netflix, The Trade Desk, Roku, just to name, some, right? I look at the streaming players as sort of finding their real roots in the TV landscape and coming out in like to the point of Thursday Night Football. That was dress rehearsal. Next year
Yes.
is next year is curtain. Like like you're getting on the stage, like we're taking the show across the country. Like that's basically where we're at. I think that the last shoe to fall will be whoever can scoop up the last of the biggest sports rights that you can get. And that's going to really determine, hey, the balance of power that like broadcasters and traditional IP holders, not necessarily like the Disneys of the world, but like those old guard are passing the baton to Amazon, Netflix, potentially some of the like Apple or the tertiary platforms. But it's like who's going to hold on to the power the most, and who's going to capture so much of the share that's going to erode. And I think the players that are in the crossfire are the ones that get the most or have the most interesting conversation around them. That being the ad tech stacks, that being the CTV players that are like Roku or those types of players that are primarily positioned that don't have, like a giant e-commerce brand or arm that's attached to them. So with so much of that balance of power shifting, so much of the supply growing, but premium supply growing, it creates this like dichotomy in the market where you have the fast channels or the free ad supported TVs, and then you have these very premium AVOD products that are out there. And it's going to create this marketplace that's like so bifurcated where programmatic can help make all of this a reality on both ends. But it's like, where does this balance of power end up going? Do the big just get bigger, or do the small have a chance to really compete? Because everybody's been saying for the longest time, like, hey, CTV is still the Wild West. Like, I believe it. I totally believe it. There's so many players out there. There's so many different options, and the supply seems endless, but the demand seems finite. So it's like you're in this situation of like, I'm a campaign lead. I'm taking my linear budget or 90% of it or whatever it is over to CTV. And my options are like a mess of brands in front of you and platforms in front of you. And it's an even bigger mess than it was before. But by the way, if you wanted to target specific, moms in Ohio that play Candy Crush, right? Like you can get as granular as you want to. I think the biggest question then ends up becoming, though, with so much data overlay and like hyper targeting and kind of like being the sniper instead of the hand grenade, how frustrating that's going to be for marketers who once in the past had the option of like reach and frequency. That's all I need. That's what TV is designed for. Now you have data overlaying this, and it's like, what's my goal here? Am I trying to drive attribution? Am I trying to drive conversion? This is a channel that doesn't typically like, unless the QR code is on the screen and people are, making that, distinction, like, can we close the loop on this? Because if we can, it's super. But if you can't, you're almost like at odds, like from a fundamental perspective, I think. But maybe I could be wrong. It's the area that I'm most aligned to at this point, because it's so mysterious that whoever comes out on front, it's going to be surprising, I think, no matter what. Like, it's going to surprise everybody. Is like, who's the front runner in this? Maybe it's Amazon, right? Again, like they have MGM, they have the incredible DSP, they have Twitch, they have so many different assets under their fold, but not everybody wants to put all of their eggs in one specific video basket, right? Like YouTube still works for everybody. All these other avenues are still really strong. So it becomes a conversation of like, what's the marketer going to do? Like, what's the campaign lead going to do in this situation? Because it's a lot of head scratching, and it's a lot of heavy lifting. It really is. It's a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, I totally agree. And now they're being forced to answer for every dollar that's spent,
Yeah,
and how did
right.
it turn out, and why did you choose it? And there's not a lot of leniency. My background is a chemist, right? Like that's what I did for 6 years, and we were part of R&D. And what that meant was there's an R&D budget, and they know most of what we do is it's not being flushed down the drain, but there's no money coming out of it until you hit that one nugget and it's worth it. And that's where I think a lot of the brands that are gonna win, um, or maybe they're smaller. I mean, that's where we see a lot of these small, medium-sized brands all of a sudden becoming massive and getting acquired, is because they were able to have that little R&D budget and test and learn on all these different channels. And all of a sudden something hits, whether it's the partner, whether it's the channel, whether it's the medium, whatever it is, they're out there testing and learning, trying everything, and boom, it hits. Um, yeah. Awesome, man. I've been picking your brain. Like, any questions you have for me? This has been fun. We should do this more
Nice.
often.
Yeah, we should do this more. I love this. A little redux, media and ecom redux. Um, I think the big question, I still have a lot of questions on retail media because like you said, there's 700. We're going to get to 1,000 at some point. And there's only such a small subset that's really winning, let's say. Do you think there's going to be a point of differentiation with the 20 versus the 680? Or does it become a situation of like, well, we know where the audiences lie, so we may as well just acquire that Midwest company that sells farming equipment, right? Like, do you see a lot of that happening in the interim?
Um, you're talking like retail media. I think the reality is everybody wanted a piece of the pie from the brands that are selling, that they saw Amazon getting, and this includes Walmart all of a sudden jumping in, right? And their retail media network was a disaster forever. It's kind of tough for if you're not in a normal grocery run. There's not a great payoff for it. Some portion of that is allocated to the brands, because brands just basically they spend all their time, effort, money optimizing every single last word on an Amazon detail page, and then they'll copy and paste that onto Walmart and be like, "Why doesn't it work?" Like, well, you didn't optimize it for Walmart. Like, it wasn't going to work in the first place. So they're
Did you
already
think that was going to work in high
yeah,
school with your homework?
yeah, right, exactly,
Like,
exactly. Um, and so what I see happening in that spot is I think everybody jumped in asking for it. Now what they're seeing is it's expensive to run those media networks. When you look at it, yes, there's money coming in. What they need is the data. Is it working or not? And then they can go back to the brands and say, hey, let's go back to end caps and displays,
yeah.
aisle interrupters. Let's look at, instead of digital retail media, let's go back to what's actually working. Yes, you can put coupons on the site. Yes, we can enable you like we always did. But the reality is that the traffic there it's just not there. And the return isn't there, I don't think, for anybody. Where if you just put something in the store, like traditional retail media, I think that's where it's going to swing. I think people like what brands have been waiting for is somebody like a Megan at Claridata. I'll connect you with her if you haven't chatted with her before. Phenomenal. What she's doing is basically just want to know, right? This is all the brands I'm talking to, at least large CPG, even mid market. Like, listen, we don't mind spending there. We just got to know that it's working, and we don't need the retail media network grading their own homework.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they can't grade your own homework. I need an independent person to come in. I don't want my agency grading the homework, because my agency makes money based on a percentage of what I spend with them. So I don't want them grading the homework. I need this independent, and that's what's going to happen. It'll be, um, that's what I see happening is, all of a sudden, this mass, um, this, this deep dive on what's working and what's not, and who's going to be able to afford, that platform is the mid-market, large enterprise brands, and they're going to set the standard, and then that's going to have the dominoes fall for these smaller retail media networks.
Do you think that that's the unlock for additional spend? Because if there is very clear transparency, and conversion. Obviously, it's one of those like, hooray, this works. But you still have your shopper marketing teams, you still have your digital team. In some instances, it ships in the night, where in other instances, you do have alignment. But if you're starting to see a lot of that transparency start to come about, does it end up being a situation where the brands now have an opportunity to consolidate those departments, not in a bad way, but in a better, like a more productive way, and kind of sit there and say like, okay, we can reevaluate the budget and maybe deploy more capital with some of these RMNs that are doing, the favorable work for us?
Oh, I think that's the future of a lot of these sales and marketing teams. And I think we're starting to see a lot of it right now is a blending back together. I mean, COVID hits, massive expansion for all these e-com teams. But the reality at that point in time is there's probably 1,000 people in the US that really knew e-commerce. Overnight, we needed 8,000, 10,000. Well, they didn't learn that overnight. They just went to LinkedIn and put digital in front of whatever their job description was. And then they applied for a bunch of jobs, doubled their salary, which is great, until everybody found out they didn't really know what was going on, right? And so here we are, this battle between digital and retail. The end result of those two duking it out was the blending of the two in this omni-channel, as Michael Zakor would say, unichannel, right? Like, how do we look at this holistically? Not omni-channel being all these different, spokes, and unichannel looking at it holistically. How do we handle this area and that area? And, from a universal perspective, and that means the teams have to be blended together.
Yeah.
Now
with a zooming out kind of mentality.
Yeah. I mean, it's the interesting thing, which is a whole nother podcast, is then how do you handle the new aspects that are being pulled in, including the transportation, logistics, the pick, pack, shipping, drop shipping. So now we've got this weird time where all of a sudden, like, the VP of logistics and fulfillment is in a board meeting. Like, what are we doing? How are we changing? How are we adapting? How are we shipping stuff? I was like, what happened here? So it's complicated everything, I guess is what I'm saying.
We had a really good conversation with former Amazon logistics lead Nadia Shurabora to her point, saying like, think about the complication there, and then Amazon basically saying like, well, we're going to try and do everything we can to automate as much logistics as possible, which essentially means ripping a lot of human element out of it. Now there's less points of communication, like add that layer into it where it's like more automation could be good. But if you're, hey, I'm a merchant who does, 10 million in sales every year, and I can't get anybody on the horn to talk to me about like my 1P business at this point, like it becomes a little bit of a nightmare scenario, I guess.
Well, it's funny. My old vendor manager, when I was on the brand side and we were building a brand in Amazon, my vendor manager is super cool dude. We're chatting one day, and I was talking about interaction and launching new products and Amazon Canada, EU, and all this different stuff. He's like, yeah, that's not like those interactions aren't happening. Like, there's not enough people, like, because they're already starting downside. He's like, if Jeff Bezos could snap his fingers and turn all of his employees into robots, like, he would do it.
Yeah.
Like, and you started thinking about it, like, yeah, that's right. He probably would.
But not like the cool like cyborg from like DC, like where you keep a little humanity. I think it's more like Ultron, like I think that's kind of the. Oh man,
I like it. DC versus Marvel. I like it.
Every once in a while I gotta insert one of those. Not the sports fan here, so it's like you want to talk about the starting roster of X-Men? I'm happy to do that. But,
love it. That's awesome, my friend. Well, I think we're right here at the end of time. Justin, it's been a blast. We're going to have to do more of these. What I'll do is, when we can reconnect next, we should ping our audiences and just say, hey, what do you want us to chat about on the next one? So we'll ping this out there. But again, thanks for your time today, everybody that's listening in. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. It's been a blast. Everybody take care. Stay safe. See you in the episode next week.